Hey everyone, I wanted to introduce Kate Voss. You probably read about her on the credits, but there is a person behind the credits, isn't there, Kate?
Hey, Jim. We had two awesome conversations back
Yeah,
to back.
I know. And there's been a lot of really good ones, and there's a lot of good ones coming. Let's talk about these two.
So, Jonathan Gluck, incredible writer, came out with a memoir, and we had him on the show. And I feel like all three of us were close to tears at different moments. I wanted to ask you, Jim, what were some of your favorite moments in that episode?
I think probably among the favorites was when he really talked about how real difficult the actual diagnosis and treatment cascade over the years put pressure on the marriage. He's got a wife that's obviously ultimately incredibly supportive and positive and helpful, but when you go through and have cancer hanging over your head like he has for so long, I think there's a stress and a tension that just exists there. Loved hearing about how he has leveraged his love of fly fishing as a way to be with himself in a more powerful way. So it was just an interesting take on fly fishing, which I've done and my son does quite a bit of. So it's just going to make me think about what the meditative, focused effects of fly fishing can be and healing effects. So that was probably a couple highlights.
Yeah, I love that. There's a line in the book, I think when he first intros fly fishing as his exercise in finding certainty, he says fly fishing is expensive. But what he doesn't say in the book, but he said to us, was that he actually gets different magazines and newspapers to pay for his fly fishing excursions, which I didn't know that. I thought that was so great.
Which is so,
it's so awesome that he writes about it.
So fly, as the kids would say. I will say, also, I get to sing on this one a little bit because he mentioned his favorite album, and I was trying to find out if one of my favorite Neil Young songs was on it. So for people who really want to hear me sing, this is the one.
The book is called Exercise in Uncertainty, and it is about living with illness and also holding on to hope. And he's written for hundreds of publications. He's won many awards, and we were just so lucky to get to talk to him.
Okay, everyone, you ready for this episode? Let's go. Thanks, Jonathan. I read your story in People, and of course, so quickly it resonated for a lot of reasons. And you know that I've done a podcast with Kathy Giusti and have worked in the space, launched a lot of products in the space in multiple myeloma. So it was super relevant.
No, I appreciate you reaching out. And, you've probably seen this, I imagine yourself, but it's been incredibly rewarding to do something for this community that needs all the help they can get very often, and to see the response and how the book seems to be resonating with people. And I dare say helping people has been really, really meaningful.
Oh, I'm sure it's helping people. Anyway, here's the book, everybody.
Nice.
We will always need to show the book. An exercise in uncertainty. Talk a little bit about that, right? Why'd you did you come up with the title or did somebody else?
It's a great question. The short answer is my editor came up with the title, and it was plucked from a line in the book where I was talking about pretty early on after my diagnosis. I was speaking with my primary oncologist, and I had, 1,000 questions like you do at that stage of something like this. And I was asking him this and that, and prognosis and treatment options. And if I do this option, what's likely to happen to me? And that option, what's likely to happen to me? And his answer to pretty much everything was he would give me a best guess, but then he would say, the truth is we just don't know. And after, in the book, writing about that whole litany of questions with basically the same answer, I had made the observation that it was then that I learned that cancer is an exercise in uncertainty. And my editor, very wisely, I think, because I like the title too, plucked that out and thought, not only did it have a nice ring to it, but it really captures the larger idea of the book, which is whether you're sick or not, whether you have other difficulties or not, we all face uncertainty. It's not just cancer. It's not just other chronic illness, not even just health issues. It can be economic issues. It can be political issues. It can be social issues. It can be your life circumstances where you're born, war-torn countries. Everybody faces uncertainty.
Well, we're here to talk about the one related to the big C, the cancer, the thing that continues to hit everybody probably more than we want. So with that in mind, one thing that was certain is they told you you had cancer. Let's start at, I guess, what you call the slip, right? How did you find out you were sick? Was it a uncertain journey to get there, or did they tell you right away? Like, How did this go?
It's a great question. It was very uncertain and took forever. So it started out, the reason I call that first section of the book, The Slip, I was leaving my office one night in downtown Manhattan, and I just slipped on a patch of ice. It was just a tiny slip. I didn't even fall. I barely even noticed it, except I twisted my hip for a second. I kind of regained my balance and I went on. The next morning I woke up and my hip hurt a lot. And I thought to myself, well, that's a little weird. I didn't barely slip at all. And why does my hip hurt so much? But I just chalked it up to, maybe I'm getting a little older. I was 37 years old at the time. Maybe this is the first kind of thing you hear people talk about. Aches and pains start to set in easier than before. So I didn't think anything of it. A few weeks or months went by and I decided this still hurts, I realized, and I better go see a doctor. So I saw my orthopedist and he took x-rays, but the x-rays didn't show anything. And he just gave me a physical therapy prescription and told me to go back about my life. Fast forward to the following November. That was November when I slipped on the ice, November of 2002. So November of 2003 came along and I realized this not only still hurts, but it hurts much worse. And I was having trouble getting up and down stairs, getting in and out of cabs. My wife and I had had our first child at that point. She was 7 months old. I was having trouble picking her up. Went back to the doctor. This time he did an MRI, called me right away, said, I'd like you to come in to talk about your test results. And I was so incredibly naive. I actually thought to myself, like, wow, what a great doctor. In this day and age, he's going to call me in to give me my test results face to face instead of just sending me my chart. So I went in, and the second I got there, I knew something was wrong. The receptionist had kind of a grave tone about her, and she immediately looked over her shoulder. They had obviously been prepared for me. Somebody else took me straight to an examining room, no waiting room. The doctor came in and told me, I have to tell you, you have a lesion on your hip. And I said, a lesion? What is that? Is that like a tumor? And he said, yes. And just like that, from 1 minute to the next, I, had a cancer diagnosis.
Incredible he used the word lesion. It as if you'd know what it was. I'm getting DTs from my wife's own similar, horrible, difficult diagnosis journey. I mean, what did you think the pain was? I'm always fascinated how we talk ourselves out of the grimmest possibility. I myself had that conversation with my wife. She always I thought everything was cancer. But how did you guys rationalize a year and here's your 38 and you can't lift your 7-month-old boo? How'd you talk about it? How'd the rest of the family talk about it?
Yeah. First, let me just say I'm sorry that you and your family have been through this, and I know how difficult it is. So the answer to your question is, it honestly never crossed my mind that it was anything more than some kind of orthopedic injury. And first and foremost, because there seemed to be a cause. It didn't seem to add up exactly that I twisted my hip and it hurt that badly and wouldn't go away. But it's not like it was totally out of the blue where I might have started to wonder, gosh, what could be causing this? So I never even opened that door in my mind. On top of that, I have no family history of cancer. I had no serious risk factors for cancer. And then I guess if in retrospect, I would say on top of all of that, and probably more important than all of that, who wants to imagine that it could be something so serious? And I am raised in our culture, right? If you're a guy, you're supposed to be tough and you're supposed to say, oh, big deal. So my hip hurts a little bit. I don't need to see a doctor. How many of us put off going to the doctor even for routine things? I just never thought about it that way. And once or twice, like I said, when it got to the point where it had been many months, and I was busy raising a new, baby girl. I had a new job at the time, sort of a dream job, working as an editor at New York Magazine, which is a place I had wanted to work forever.
Yeah.
You're starting out a new job. You're trying to prove yourself and put in the extra hours. And the last thing you want to do is take time off for doctor's appointments. Or in the back of my mind, my worst case scenario was maybe I'll need surgery. And so partly I was putting it off because it's like, I didn't want to go and have the surgery and have difficulty helping my wife with our daughter and have difficulty at work at a new job. But I'll tell you an interesting story about all this. Many years later, I was speaking to the same orthopedist who initially diagnosed me and then, of course, passed me along to oncologists. And he said, that slip on the ice was like an angel's kiss. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, who knows how long you would have gone undiagnosed and how much farther the cancer may have gotten if you hadn't slipped on the ice and hurt your hip. And so that's how I've come to think about it ever since.
Kathy Giusti wrote a whole book about how to navigate the healthcare system once you get these diagnoses, and she's certainly had her share of them. I think what you're saying is so important, and what I say all the time here on this program, which is stay out of the system. Do everything you can to stay out of the system. And the way to do that is to jump on it. But look, you're an inspirational story. I mean, a lot of times these diagnoses are death sentences, not what they were, thanks to Kathy Drusty and the work of Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation and a lot of great companies that have come along with drugs. Can you tell us, just if you're comfortable talking a little bit of what was your treatment pathway and how did you get through it?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about it. It's all documented very thoroughly in the book. And one of the things I wanted to do is be as detailed as I could for a lay audience. It's not a scientific book, so that people could see the reality of what it's like to go through these treatments. I think we all have a lot of stereotypes in mind. I know I did. In some cases, I imagined some of the things I would go through would be worse than they were. And in other cases, I imagined, based on those stereotypes, that some things wouldn't be as bad as they were and they were worse. So I tried to put down at least my reality to help educate people about what that reality is. So I started out, my initial treatment was a round of radiation therapy on my hip for, I believe it was 28 sessions, I think, 5.5 weeks.
Wow.
The overall pattern of my treatment experience has been, which is typical in multiple myeloma, I'm diagnosed, I'm treated, I go into a remission, sometimes a partial remission, sometimes a complete remission. Luckily, I've had a response to just about everything, some level of response. That remission lasts in some cases for a very short time, a matter of months. In other cases, a very long time. I've had one remission of 7 full years, which was almost unheard of. And then I get sick again and I get a different treatment. And so those treatments have included 4 rounds now of radiation therapy, 2 rounds of chemotherapy, many, many rounds of different immunotherapy drugs in different combinations, and an ongoing regimen of monthly IV infusions of a substance called immunoglobulin, which is an important element of your immune system to help boost my immunity, which has been damaged over the years, both by the illness itself and the treatments I've had. And so I'm quite immune compromised, and I need these monthly infusions to keep me healthy that way.
And you're about 50 now?
60. Yeah. Thanks for saying. Yeah, you guessed in the right direction, Jim. I love you.
All right. Well, you and I are the same age. You look great. You look
Thank
normal. It's as if you didn't have it, but obviously you had it. How do you explain how well you've done?
You will relate to this because the answer I always give people is science. I've just been incredibly lucky to have been diagnosed with this disease at a time when there have been revolutionary breakthroughs in the treatment of many cancers, but in particular, multiple myeloma. So early on, that same doctor who inspired that thought about an exercise in uncertainty, when he and I were talking about my diagnosis, he said to me, the bad news is your prognosis is not very good right now because we haven't had a lot of drugs to treat this. The good news is there are a ton of drugs in the pipeline. And I thought maybe part of me just thought, oh, he's blowing smoke. He's just trying to give me some hope. But he turned out to be 1,000% correct. And those drugs all came online, many of them, not only during the time since I was diagnosed, but incredibly enough. And I didn't even realize this myself until I put the timeline together for the book in a detailed way. Many of them came around or were FDA approved, honestly, within months or maybe a year and a half or two of when I needed them. So I'm incredibly grateful to the scientific and research community and the biomedical community in general for developing these treatments. Plain and simple, I wouldn't be here without them.
And that's great. And I know that's why people continue to invest. I know that's why I invest in these opportunities, because ultimately that does happen for many as a way. I know you took CAR-Ts, right? Did you get those? And so you've had lots of the next gens that are there and designed for the people who get recurrence, but otherwise in the past probably would have not had a chance, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I've had a number of those treatments designed for people with multiple relapses. And I've had, again, I've lost count at this point, 10, 12 recurrences. And just in the nick of time, pretty much every time something has come along that is effective to one degree or another.
Tell me, how have you coped with it? How did you deal? I mean, you were a young guy when it started. Your career, it couldn't stop it. I'd love to hear about how your family coped.
It's funny you mentioned career because I'll start there. I mean, one thing I've said to people over the years, or people have noticed over the years, is, I've honestly barely missed a day of work during all this time. And they say, oh, there's this cancer stereotype kind of, oh, you're so brave or that's so courageous. And I always say, believe me, it's got nothing to do with bravery or courage. It had to do with self-preservation. Work is an excellent distraction. And I had a demanding job and it required a lot of hours and a lot of mental energy. And sometimes people would say to me, oh gosh, are you sure you want to be that stressed when you have a diagnosis like this? And I said, that's not stress to me. That's stress relief. Stress is sitting around bored and allowing your mind to run in circles and go to dark places. So first and foremost, I guess I would say work was in many ways how I coped. I'm also extremely lucky to have an incredible family and friends who have been supportive emotionally and have been there if I need practical help with anything, really, going to doctor's appointments or dealing with side effects. And having my daughter be just 7 months old when I was diagnosed was, of course, on one hand, horrible because I found myself thinking a lot about my daughter. Is she going to have to grow up without a father? Is my wife going to have to raise her by herself and all the burdens that entails? On the other hand, it was a blessing because my daughter gave me a great reason to live and something fun and engaging and to do every day. And again, you're super busy when you're raising a child that age. But that was another thing that helped keep my mind off of things. It's pretty hard not to be happy with a little kid at bath time and reading time. It's like, even when you have something really rotten going on, I used to call her my joy machine because she would reliably bring me joy no matter what else was going on. And then another way, which I write about a lot in the book, is fly fishing. That's my hobby. It's my passion. Before I got sick, I was a pretty avid fly fisherman. After I got sick, it became almost like a necessity. It's so engaging. You're focused completely on what you're doing. You're in a beautiful place, which is relaxing in its own right, on a river, usually mountains and sunshine.
Where do you fish mostly?
I fish upstate here in the Catskills sometimes, but I learned to fish in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and made a very good friend there. The first fishing guide I ever had has become a lifelong friend, and I talk about that first trip and about him in the book. And I still go out there a lot to Wyoming and Idaho and Montana. In fact, I was just there last week fishing with the same guy. Like I say, we become lifelong friends. And it's, as always, just a completely wonderful escape for me.
So you talk about the concept of procrastination, and I could totally relate to it and how I've coped through my wife's journey, through post that, this idea of work. A lot of my friends say work is my jam, and that's probably true. Can you tell me how you handle the affliction of procrastination? Are there upsides and downsides to it? My guess is there are.
Yeah. So I think what happened to me happens to a lot of people who've been through a serious diagnosis or sometimes maybe a life-threatening event or a near-death experience, if you want to call it that, a car crash or something, or maybe they lose somebody close to them. And I hate to give cancer credit for anything positive, but there are certain lessons you learn that can be valuable. And for me, one of those lessons was, if you want to do something, do it now. Don't put it off, because none of us is promised tomorrow, as they say. And so I kind of developed this habit of pouncing on things when I want to do them. So that can be something small. If I think of a friend, I'll text them and say hello. It could be something large, like a trip to Patagonia or Alaska. Once I get my mind set that I want to do something, I'm going to do it as fast as I reasonably can. And somewhere along the line, after I had noticed that I had begun doing that, it wasn't something I consciously set out to do. It just kind of kicked in after I got sick, especially at times when I was in remission and have the opportunity to do those things. Somewhere along the line, I came across this term precrastination, which is basically the opposite of procrastination. So procrastination is you tend to put things off. Precrastination is you have an almost compulsive urge to do everything right away. And I do have a bit of that. And as you say, it's got pluses. And I just kind of went through some of those. So it helps you live life to the fullest and jump on things while you can. The downside, and you could ask some of my colleagues or family members about this, is that I can be a bit impatient. I'm always chop with myself and with them. And what's taking you so long? It's like, don't you realize life is short? And sometimes I have to watch that. But for the most part, it's been, like I say, I hesitate to give cancer credit for anything, but for the most part, it's been a positive development. I'm also a New Yorker, and we're fast here in general. So yeah, you put those two things together and you've got a Tasmanian devil.
All right. Well, there could be worse devils, kinds of devils.
Very true.
So Dee, your wife, keeps it real, as your rabbi said during your wedding ceremony. I love that, but I'm biased. I like to keep things real. My podcast is about getting real. So you don't shy away from how cancer plus life, work, children can put pressure on the family, the marriage. obviously marriage with or without cancer. Do you want to speak to any of that? I mean, how did you guys navigate the sort of better or worse, death do us part thing that I think some people probably face when this all goes down?
Yeah, it's something we both feel really strongly about. And having gone through some pretty serious difficulties, which I'll get into in a minute, we realized the book was just not going to be real, to use your word, or helpful to people if we sugarcoated things. So we had many long conversations about remembering what we went through, as well as deciding on what we wanted to share. And in the end, we decided we wanted to share more rather than less of the reality of it. There's this sort of Hollywood stereotype, is how I put it, of if somebody gets sick and if they're in a close relationship, their partner of whatever kind, their partner is this angelic figure, right? Who's always there to be helpful and soothing and kind and go to all the appointments and be there with the ice chips. Well, in our case anyway, that wasn't true. I should point out that my wife was amazing in many ways. She did come to many of my appointments, and let's not forget, we had a 7-month-old daughter when I was diagnosed, and she was still a new mom. She was still nursing. She was a working mom. She was still working full time. So the burden that this placed on her was tremendous, needless to say. And she didn't have a ton of time to devote to me. You know, she had a lot of other stuff going on that had to happen first. In theory, I was fine with that and I understood. But over time, as happens with these things, sometimes you can start to build up resentment. So that was one issue. Another issue is my wife, just by chance, lost her father when she was quite young. And we used to have sort of a dark humor joke between us that they say you marry your father, it's not supposed to be like that. And the idea that she might lose somebody else very close to her prematurely was very scary for her. And I think triggering, to use the modern word. So just emotionally, in many ways, she kind of put up a wall. And I'm saying that lovingly. And I know that she would be the first person to say it herself. And for her own emotional protection, she just needed to keep that wall up to some degree. Which again, isn't to say she wasn't there for me. She wasn't thoughtful. She didn't care. But that day to day that kind of crept in without either of us knowing, with me getting a little resentful and then getting more and more needy and angry for more attention and more support that she just reasonably couldn't give. And then her getting angry at me for wanting that or not feeling ever satisfied that she was doing enough, even though she was doing a lot and had 10 million other things on her plate. That those kind of tectonic plates started rubbing together and really caused a rift in our relationship to the point where we were together, but we barely spoke. There wasn't a lot of warmth in our relationship. And finally, to your point again of her getting real, she said to me, this sucks and we need to do something about it. And we wound up going to couples counseling, and we're very lucky. I had a wonderful couples counselor who helped us rekindle some warmth between us.
Often you just have to decide to deal with it, much like, I guess, the cancer itself, right? When you first learn you have cancer, you don't think about the next, I think you wrote this, right? You don't think about the next 20 years. You think about the next 20 seconds, which is a great line. So with or without cancer, the next 20 seconds are all we know. In a way, cancer creates that clarity. Did that do that for both of you, or really did Didi come along in that journey? I mean, how did that evolve, or did you have to counsel through that?
Yeah, some of both. I think some of it is just time and getting used to a radically new situation. I often say cancer is like a nuclear bomb. It's not just the explosion, it's all the fallout. And that fallout takes a long time to even understand, let alone get used to, let alone process in a healthy or productive way. So some of it was just time and some of it was counseling. And I think what we came to understand is there's a big difference between trying to win an argument and trying to solve the problem. And once we stopped each of us trying to be right and insist that the other person was wrong, and we started to get more into a mindset of there's a problem here that we need to work on together to mutually solve, because that's going to be good for both of us. It's going to be good for both of us individually. It's going to be good for our relationship. It's going to be good for our kids. I've subsequently had a son, so I have 2 kids now. Once we got into that mindset, things started to get a lot better, and it wasn't easy. Don't want to pretend it was. I also don't want to pretend that everything's hunky-dory all the time. Now we have the same struggles everybody has.
Well, I wouldn't believe you.
Yeah, exactly.
So it wouldn't matter.
Exactly. But that was kind of the key mindset shift.
How'd the kids handle it? How did they deal?
So that was super tricky for my wife and I to figure out when to tell them. My daughter, when I was diagnosed, as I said, was 7 months old. Obviously, you're not going to tell a 7-month-old. My son came along almost 5 years later. And I learned something interesting along the way where we had talked to a lot of people about wanting to tell our kids and when we should tell our kids. And that included our therapists and doctors and friends and people who've been through something similar. Everything we heard was basically, there's no great time. But another thing we heard was, I never thought of this distinction before, was there's a difference between your need to tell somebody something and their need to know it. And we started to approach that problem that way. And I started to think, my wife and I had this need to tell. We didn't want to keep secrets from our kids. We didn't want to carry around a secret ourselves. It can be burdensome to carry around a secret. But they didn't have a need to know. It wasn't age appropriate for them to know. They probably couldn't have understood even what was happening. It probably would have just been scary without helping them in any way. So we waited till we thought their ages were appropriate. And then we just told them. And after years and years of worrying about it, it actually went really well. And they were lovely and supportive. And another thing I tried to do, again, based on advice we had gotten from friends and doctors and therapists, was tell them at a time when I was healthy and in a full remission and could confidently say, my doctors say I'm doing well and they expect I'm going to continue to do well because there are all these new treatments. And so just take a look at me. You can see for yourself, I'm fine. I think that was a big part of telling them in a way that was as gentle as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I totally went through it myself and had older kids when it happened. And I think their view is we're old enough to know. And at the same time, it's always a bit of a struggle. So I don't think, again, there's any right. There is just how you handle it and make it work. And you are here. So that's pretty incredible. Was there a time you didn't think you were going to be here? Did you ever lose faith?
Yeah, many times. There was a time I was quite sick. I had come out of a remission and there was some delay in figuring out what we were going to do next because there were a couple of choices and I wanted to get a couple of opinions. And I started getting sicker fairly rapidly and then finally settled on a treatment plan to enter a clinical trial up in Boston at Dana-Farber Cancer Center, which is, as you know, one of the renowned cancer centers in the world. And I was able to get into a clinical trial there involving 2 immunotherapy drugs. And I was just about to start the following week when one of my kids had an emergency, a serious emergency, a health emergency. And we were in the emergency room with them, my wife and I, and just, you know, how that is. You're just at your wit's end and absolutely terrified that the worst is going to happen. And as I was sitting there in the emergency room, waiting room, while the doctors were treating my child, I got a phone call. I made it this far without getting emotional, but now you got me. I got a phone call as I was sitting there and I looked at my phone and it was from the doctor's office in Boston. And they were calling to arrange the first appointment for this clinical trial treatment I was going to be in. And I thought to myself, man, it doesn't get much lower than this. You know, I'm in the emergency room with my child in a life-threatening situation, and I'm getting called by my oncologist to start treatment for an experimental treatment at that I didn't know if it was going to work or not. And that was one of the few times where I think, to answer your question directly, where I thought, I'm not sure this is going to work out.
How did that and other incidents make you want to keep living? I suppose it was the kids, right? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, more than anything, you're right. Every day, that's 2 amazing reasons. The only 2 reasons I need to keep going are them. They're great kids. They're funny. They're smart. They're nice to be around. So just being in their company is very inspiring to me. My 60th birthday came along earlier this year and everybody said, oh, it's a milestone birthday. And for you, it's a bigger deal. Given everything that happened, what do you want to do? Something fantastic, travel to, I don't know, Paris or Hong Kong, or
take everyone to Vegas.
Take everyone to Vegas, or have a big surprise party. They told me they were talking about at one point, my wife and kids and my siblings. And I said to my wife, you know what? I don't want to do any of that. The thing that has meant the most to me through all of this is you guys, my wife and my 2 kids. And I was like, let's just be together. Let's go out to dinner. Let's do nothing but just the 4 of us. And then as it turned out, so everybody was cool with that. Then as it turned out, my daughter was still in college. She just graduated, but this was back in April. And she's a drama major and she was in a play that weekend of my birthday. So we decided we were all going to go out to see her.
Yeah, that's cool.
And we saw her play. And then for my 60th birthday, they were like, okay, well, where do you want to go for dinner, Dad? Let's take you someplace nice. I was like, I like the college cafeteria. Your college cafeteria is awesome. So
Wait, what college is it?
she went to Kenyon College in Ohio.
Got it.
And they have, I have to say, a fantastic dining hall, a cafeteria.
Wow.
That's my vibe. I just wanted something really low key and just with my family. And I didn't feel right. It was a strange thing to celebrate. It's like, well, celebrating cancer is a little weird. Even though I realize it's my birthday and I'm very happy to be here. Also, I've gotten a little superstitious, to be totally honest, over the years. And I don't feel comfortable acting as if I've won this battle when I know there's still lots more to go.
Does it feel like it's hanging over your head, or do you feel power over it?
Oh, it always feels like it's hanging over my head. I think I've learned over the years to have some degree of, I guess you could say, power over it if you just want to talk about like how I've learned to cope. But there are many times I have no power over it. Believe me, it's much more powerful than I am. And one of the things I write about in the book is there was that, I don't know if anybody remembers their Greek mythology. I didn't until I came across this phrase, but the sword of Damocles, it was the sword that was hung over somebody's head to remind them he was given all this wealth, but the sword was hung over his head to remind him what power and wealth can bring in terms of potential dangers in your life. And he had to live with that sword hanging over him. And that, I think, is how a lot of people in my position feel when you've got one of these diagnoses that, luckily in my case, and believe me, I realize how fortunate I am compared to some others, I do get to live with this. On the other hand, I have to live knowing it's going to come back. And that is like a sword.
But it's powerful to know that you got the diagnosis, you got treatment, you took chances. Is there any point in this journey where you could point to and say, yeah, that was a great move I made?
I wouldn't say that I had, but I would say that some of my doctors have had. And I guess I'm involved in the sense that I had to pick ultimately. So at one point, one of my doctors wanted to go ahead with a standard protocol for what I have, which would have been a stem cell transplant. And that can be a wonderful treatment. It's something I probably will still have at some point. I haven't yet had. But at the time that was recommended to me, it's a very big deal and very risky.
I know people have done it. Yep.
Yeah. So naturally, I wanted a second opinion. That's when I first got in touch with the doctor at Dana-Farber, who I wound up seeing for many years. His name's Paul Richardson. I'm more than happy to plug.
Oh, yeah. He's a big deal. People know him. Yeah.
He is indeed. And he said, I don't think a transplant is best in your particular case because you're young. I'm unusually young to have this disease at all. He made a very, I think, in retrospect, extremely nuanced and brilliant judgment that it was wiser in my case to, as he put it, keep our powder dry and use other, if you want to say, smaller treatments while I was still young and relatively healthy otherwise, and hold the big guns in reserve for when I really needed them. And there were other people who disagreed with that pretty forcefully, but I don't know how or why I chose to go that route. I just had a sixth sense that he was to be trusted, and he was a hyper specialist in this area and extremely well known. To me, it just made sense to trust him, and it turned out to be the right call.
Did you get more or less religion during this time? Did you have religion in your background? I always wonder, like, what gives people the mettle? I guess you find it. But did you have something particularly that you can point to that helped you through this?
I'm not a religious person, but they say no atheists in a foxhole. I also say no atheists on an oncology ward. There's certainly been times where I've been out of other options and prayed for some kind of good outcome or some kind of relief from what I was going through, but I'm not formally religious. One of the things that's been interesting, and I mentioned it briefly before, is I have become quite superstitious, which most of the people I know sort of laugh at because I'm otherwise very skeptical of what you could, I guess, glibly call woo-woo things. That's never been my kind of mindset. But after I got sick, it is in certain ways. My wife bought me the stuffed tiger from the hospital once from the gift shop, and I've kept that ever since.
Does it have a name?
It doesn't have a name. Maybe I should name it. My mother-in-law brought me, I should, a little Buddha she's a pianist and was playing a concert in China and brought me back a little Buddha that she said sort of spoke to her in terms of looking over me or protecting me. I still have that. When times are really rough and I'm going through something particularly difficult, sometimes I go and I get the stuffed tiger and I have a little chat with him, or sometimes I get the Buddha and I rub his little head, the way for good luck. So that's sort of, I guess, one of the ways I cope. And then, like I said, I'm just extremely fortunate to have friends and family that I can talk to and turn to. And I'm also lucky to have good health insurance. I have a therapist I can talk to. I have a pretty great support system, and I'm very grateful for it.
What about the wraparound care? Did you ever do acupuncture or meditation? My wife did a lot of this stuff, and I always felt it helped with the quality of the life, even though she was mainly doing traditional therapies because her cancer was rare and there weren't new things other than clinical trials, which are still to be proved out. So what kind of things did you do or have you done in that regard?
Yeah, it's funny you ask, because I had a recent experience with this. So going back about 3 or 4 years ago, I came out of remission again and I had another recurrence, and that presented as quite a number of lesions on my bones in different areas. But the largest ones were on my other hip, what I used to think of as my good hip, because the first one was on my left hip and this one was on my right hip.
And have you had hip replacement or anything
I haven't.
like that?
And it's interesting. A lot of people ask me that, but the hip replacement essentially fixes the joint. Your hip is like a ball and socket, and the hip replacement.
I know a lot about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Replaces that top of that bone. If you have lesions kind of here, there, and everywhere in a random pattern, the replacement isn't going to do anything to fix those. So I haven't had that. And I've been treated since then, as we talked about earlier, with CAR T therapy, and I am in a full remission currently and have been for a couple of years. However, the damage from those lesions caused me a lot of orthopedic pain. And I had been through every traditional type of doctor you could see to try and treat that pain, and it wasn't getting any better. One of my doctors said, have you ever considered acupuncture? And I recently started seeing an acupuncturist who does a combination of acupuncture, deep tissue massage, and cupping, where they put the...
Yep, I've done it.
And finally, after years of pain in that hip that was more or less unrelenting, even just in the last month or 6 weeks, I've started to feel better.
Oh, hallelujah. That's great. And I'm so glad I asked you, because I think there are some other types of treatments out there that are less invasive, but still, again, this combo of Eastern and Western medicine is an interesting idea. One of the questions, Kate put this into my head because I am so obsessed with longevity and staying youthful and remaining younger, but you have a little different view about all this given your journey.
Yeah, I mean, I share your view to some extent. I have a little bit different view, but also a little bit the same. And what I mean by that is, after I got sick, I definitely started taking better care of myself. I pay more attention to diet and exercise and try and eat right and try not to drink too much or smoke, try and go to the gym as often as I can. But I also kind of had this attitude, as I wrote in the book, that like, what's the use of being alive if you don't live a little? So I haven't become a person who's super strict about my diet or super strict about never having a beer or bourbon or something, or never staying out late. I try and mostly maintain good habits. I think most of us try, but I haven't crossed the line into being really kind of obsessed about it. I just think I try and get 80% of the way there. And then if I screw up the other 20% of the time, I try and allow myself to just do that and enjoy it.
Well, live while you're living. I mean, that's what I hear a lot for people who are going through this. So I think that's a reinforcement of that. It's not like you haven't navigated enough that's hard. So give yourself a little bit of something fun and good times. So how about work? Has it changed how you've approached work and the stories you want to tell, cover? Tell us where you are right now in your career.
Yeah, it has. And I think the book is really the culmination of that. One of the things that's strange about being in my position, where you're sick, but you're not so sick that you can't work, but you're also never going to get better, is that I was diagnosed when I was young. I'm not a billionaire, so I had to work. I've always had to work. And so you try and balance that necessity against some other things that are changing at the same time. And in my case, that was just wanting to do work that was as meaningful to me as possible. For many years, I was very fortunate working at New York Magazine. I was able to do a lot of work that I found very meaningful. And that in some cases was something super serious, maybe about, I did one story I was very proud of, worked with a tremendous writer and friend of mine on this story. I worked on it as an editor, about sexual abuse in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, similar to sexual abuse among priests and kids in the Catholic community. that was a very powerful story that led to the arrest of an abusive rabbi, and a story I felt very worthy about, even though it was a tough story to work on. But I also really enjoyed doing the fun stories at New York Magazine. Sometimes we would write about food trends or pizza or food carts, and just stories that gave people a lot of enjoyment and figuring out how to live a more fun, exciting life in New York. As time went on, I got more and more, as I think a lot of people do, whether they're sick or not as you get older, interested in doing stories that were really personal to me one way or another. And so I began looking for opportunities to do that and also to help other people tell their personal stories. So I worked at a company called Medium for a time that is essentially a blogging platform that helps people tell their own stories. And I got very interested in that at one point because we all have a story to tell. And then, as I say, the culmination of all this was the book, where I realized I feel it's time for me now, after all these years, to share this story. There's a lot to it that I think other people can benefit from hearing. And so that, to me, has been the most meaningful work I've done for sure, and kind of lines up with where this whole journey has taken me.
Well, what's next? Where do you go from here? The book becomes a movie, becomes a show. What do you think?
Yeah, it's such early days. It's hard to know. I mean, as I said, when you and I were talking right at the very beginning, I've been incredibly gratified by the responses I've gotten from other people both in and out of the cancer community, whether they're cancer patients themselves or family members of people or caregivers or supporters, whether they've been through some other chronic illness, whether they've just been through some difficulty that had nothing to do with illness. That connection to people I'm feeling is very powerful. I've done a number of events at bookstores, and people come up to me and tell me their stories. And some people have said to me, is that really hard? That's so heavy. And I'm finding it very uplifting, actually, to be able to provide that service, if you want to call it that, for somebody where they feel like they can share their story, particularly with somebody who understands and gets where they've been. There's something very powerful in that bond. Where I'm going with all that in terms of your question is, one thing I've been thinking about doing is more speaking engagements where I can have that connection with other people and try and make something good out of something that otherwise is pretty rotten and help people.
It's amazing because I do think by inspiring others that there can be a positive outcome, and there are clinical trials and there are things that can be done, then I think that is a very cool mission, if you will. So I think keep doing it. Thank you. I do have like a couple lightweight questions that I always ask every guest so we can have a little fun. Well, I kind of feel like I know what you're going to say to this one, but I want to know, what is your dream vacation? Or maybe you've taken it already.
No, I mean, you're right that you know that it's going to be a fishing trip. I've gotten an assignment to go to Patagonia. I've gotten an assignment to go to Alaska. So I've been able to fish in those two places, which are pretty much on every serious fly fisherman's bucket list. The place I haven't been yet, so the answer to your question, is New Zealand. I really want to fish in New Zealand.
Yeah, my son keeps talking about that one.
Yeah. That's supposed to be fantastic. I've watched a bunch of videos. I've read up on it. I've done a fair amount of research. And one of these days, I'm going to procrastinate my way into a trip there.
And then if you're going to a desert island, what album are you going to take? If they only had one album to take.
Ooh, that's a good one. I guess my desert island album would be, wow, I can only choose one. I was going to cop out and give you two, but I'm going to say Neil Young Live Rust. And it's because it covers so many emotions. It's not just sad. It's not just upbeat. It's not just dark. It's not just light. It's not just fast. It's not just slow. It's got a little bit of everything. That's what I'm going to go with.
Is Sugar Mountain on that? What is that?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure I could tell you with 100% certainty.
Born to live on.
I'm going to say yes, but I don't want to be quoted
with all
on
the
it.
barkers and the colored balloons. Yeah.
You're a much better singer than I am. You're very brave to sing in public.
I know. What am I doing?
Never try that.
I'm not in a shower right now. All right, Kate.
That was so great.
Well, he wrote the book. I mean, that was easy. You know, when someone writes the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I don't know the material, nobody's gonna, right?
One thing that I really made me cry when I read it in the book. And if it makes you cry, we don't have to keep it on. But
it's okay. I believe me, there's been plenty of crying in this process. Yeah.
I just thought it was so beautiful. You studied with Kate Sweeney at UC Riverside to learn about living with uncertainty and how to cope with uncertainty. And towards the end of the book, you talk about losing your dad. And you said you still text him pictures of your fish. Is that part of the art of coping?
Wow. Yeah, you were right. I didn't think you were going to get me, but you got me. Yeah. It's just,
I couldn't get over it because
Yeah.
I just think that's so amazing.
yeah, the honest answer is I don't think, I mean, you've really actually making me think about something new, which is cool. Like, I hadn't thought about it that way prior to now. I'd mostly thought about it just in terms of keeping in touch with him and keeping our relationship alive, even though he's gone. But I think you're right, because he was a big part of my support system, and fishing was a big part of my support system. And showing him those pictures always brought me so much joy and brought him a lot of joy. And as you also read in the book, he was not a fisherman, but much later in life, when he was 80, I took him fishing for the first time. Then the two of us went fishing together. So it was this very special bond we shared over this, even though he wasn't nearly as avidly into it as I was. So I do think it was a way for me to cope and just keep the strength of that
Who
relationship.
taught you how to fish? How'd you get into it?
Yeah, my wife and I were on vacation in Wyoming, and we had done kind of all the other things you do there, hiking, biking, river rafting. And we actually just went up to the desk clerk at the little inn we were staying at one night and said, we've done all these other things. We've got a couple more days. What do you recommend we do? And she said, well, have you ever gone fly fishing? And my wife and I had both fished as kids conventionally with rod and reel, spin casting, but neither of us were serious about it. We'd each fished, a handful of times, maybe 10 times with our parents or grandparents. So we said no, but we'd love to try. And she set us up she said, I'll get you a guide in the morning and he'll pick you up at 7:00 sharp and he'll take you out. And that's, my friend, that's how we met. And that night, not only did Dee Dee, my wife, and I have an incredible time fishing, but we all had so much fun and got along so well. He called his wife when we came off the river and said, his girlfriend at the time, I met this great couple. You got to come out and meet us for drinks and dinner. And we all hung out that night and became, as I say, friends forever. So it was really just kismet, I guess. Right place, right time, right people. And we both just kind of fell in love with it.
That's awesome.
Amazing. See how these things happen. I know. Well, listen, thanks so much. Thanks for writing the book. Thanks for sharing your story. We hope more people do it. We know not everyone gets to take this journey like you did. You're both lucky, privileged, honored, and inspirational to all of us. So thanks. I'm excited to share this one with everybody and hope to see you more out on the trail, continuing to inspire more people with the story.
I'd love to do that. And thanks for having me, Jem. I really appreciate it. And the work you do for this community is incredible. And thank you. And really, really grateful for all of it.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on the Get Real podcast. I hope you feel a little healthier hanging out with me. It's going to be a lot of fun passing this along to others. Please subscribe below. Please share. I'm excited not just to talk about healthcare, but a lot of other fun topics. It's about making healthy talk about healthcare. It's not a lecture. This is supposed to be fun, and look forward to spending more time with you in the future.